This is like a war. So let's come back to war. There's conscientious objectors to wars. What happens if you're against a certain war? Vietnam War, World War One, tar and feather comes from what we did to people that were conscientious objectors in the Revolutionary War. So I think when things get to be wars, patriotism kicks in, and you end up with the leader of the country saying it's your patriotic duty to buy the bonds and to own the currency and to sell your foreign currency, right? So I think we get some of that. But, wars also have winners and losers too, Safe, right? So like at the beginning of World War One, everybody was on their side and they had a lot of conviction. But at the end of the day, the war did end and there was a winner and there were losers. I mean, everybody struggled, but I think that here, what we see is this this conflict. But I think it's important. Like, it's important if you want to be effective. If you want to be effective and maintain your sanity and not get distracted, it's important to frame the war as the conflict between currencies and the conflict between assets. And ultimately, the struggle is the dollar versus the peso and the lira. And that's nation states jockeying with each other. And ultimately, there's going to be a call, to the State Department by the president of a country saying, we don't like the digital dollar circulating around here. Stop it, right? Like what is the United States, what's the Secretary of State going to say if the president of a nation that's got a currency which is dollarizing or collapsing calls and complains to the ambassador? And that's going to become a geopolitical thing, right? Maybe we don't like that, but leave that. That's above our pay grade, right? Like it's better for Turkey and Argentina and Brazil and Venezuela to work it out with the United States and the diplomats in Foggy Bottom is how they want to deal with that currency issue. And then the other war, the struggle is going to be Bitcoin versus, stocks and equities versus real estate, REITs versus gold versus commodities, right? And that's going to be a hard fought one. And there's $100 trillion at stake in both of those struggles for the next decade, right? That's going to play itself out. But if you really think of it like that, then if you want to be effective, let the diplomats sort through the issue of currencies, right? That's their job. And then if you're an evangelist or an educator in the world of Bitcoin, focus upon explaining to people why it's better for you to buy Bitcoin than buy a house in Istanbul. It's better to buy Bitcoin than buy a bar of gold, right? Help with those things, because ultimately you can win that one, right? That's a battle you can win. And you got to choose your battles and choose battles you can win that make you stronger. Right? You don't start by picking a battle you can't win that you don't even need to fight.
Are you yourself sitting there saying, honestly, I'm kind of like hoping they figure out this regulation thing fairly quickly, sooner rather than later? Are you leaning now towards more regulation than maybe you were 9 months ago so they can filter out the actors of the game?
Look, I think that regulation's a good thing for the industry, and I've never really been against it. If you're holding Bitcoin, or if you want to act as a responsible, sound institution, you don't have a problem with regulation. The people who've been fighting regulation are those that actually want to sell the unregistered securities or manipulate them. So my position was always the industry should be regulated. The roller coaster ride that is Bitcoin is because of unregistered securities trading on unregulated exchanges. That's why Bitcoin is so volatile. And so to the extent that your life is miserable in the Bitcoin world, it's because of unregulated exchanges manipulating unregistered securities. So, yeah, I mean, I think that if we look forward, what's important. I mean, people sometimes they can, what is it? They think that regulation's a bad thing. I mean, it's should you be able to cheat people? like if you went on a vacation in the Bahamas and someone put a gun to your head, stole all your money, and beat you half to death, and then you came back, in a stretcher to the United States, would you then say, I really appreciate the unregulated environment in the Bahamas? I mean,
certainly not taking a helicopter there.
Everybody, so everybody, with regard to the money, they expect things to be fair and equitable, right? And the real problem in the industry is it's too hard, or it's too easy for unethical actors to victimize honest people. And so we need to fix that, whatever you call that.
Lions get tired of facing the antelope. Lions complain to the ranger. The ranger hobbles the antelope. Lions get fat, dumb, and happy. Antelope all die. Lions all die. Ranger blames on the weather. And that is a metaphor for a lot of stuff. The antelope ran too fast, not fair, slow them down. The transaction fees were too high, not fair, make them lower. It's also a metaphor for competition. My competitor goes too fast, they're making it too difficult. Make somebody do something. But at the end of the day, you're messing with Mother Nature. It's not going to end well. Lazy lions should die, and slow antelope get eaten, and fast, strong, healthy antelope procreate, and fast, strong, healthy lions feed, and they live in an ecosystem. And if you remove the predator, all sorts of crazy bad things happen.
Well, my next guest has made what you would call a huge bet on Bitcoin, and for that reason, he frightens the establishment, and he's been an easy target for the media whenever there's a hiccup in the crypto world. Of course, this FTX episode is a lot more than that, right? It's an earthquake with ramifications far and wide, and now it has many calling for an end to the whole thing, all crypto. Joining me now, MicroStrategy Executive Chairman Michael Saylor. Michael, I cannot help but think, if Sam Bankman-Fried had gotten the kind of scrutiny that you've had to deal with your entire career, this thing would have never happened. But he's an Ivy League insider. They rolled out the red carpet for him. They put him on a pedestal. And now we're all wondering just how much we have been fleeced. Any idea yet?
It's quite the story, Charles. FTX, they created a few tokens like FTT and Serum. They promoted a few tokens. They transferred the tokens to Sam's hedge fund, Alameda. And since the supply was largely in friendly hands, they were able to manipulate the price of those tokens up through insider wash trading. They eventually got it up to $14 billion in accounting value through sleight of hand. And of course, normally the cynical Bitcoiners think, these crypto casinos are just manipulating the price of the token up to dump it on retail. But Sam came up with a particular diabolical twist to the entire thing, which is he didn't just create $14 billion of air tokens through insider trading. He actually posted them as collateral and then went shopping for a $10 billion loan from a bank against the air tokens. And the only bank that he could find that would give him the loan was his own bank. So he applied for the loan. He granted himself the loan, and then he very quietly, in a duplicitous fashion, siphoned off $10 billion or more of real assets out of FTX into Alameda, where they proceeded to spend the money on politicians and lobbying and stadium rights and advertisement and celebrity endorsements and condos in the Bahamas. And then they traded a bunch and made a bunch of bad trades, and then they lost the money. And, here we are. It's just a really tragic situation.
It really, really is. And we always say this when these things start, that we hope we get to the bottom of it. I really, truly, truly am desperate to get to the bottom of this because I think it stinks, and I think a lot of important people might have been able to help us out before then. Of course, though, that brings us to now the world again saying that the entire crypto experiment has failed, in part because the free money is drying up. Now this FTX incident, the final nail in the coffin. But you still believe. Tell us why you are still so wedded to this idea that Bitcoin is the answer.
Look, Satoshi had just a beautiful vision, a beautiful dream, and that was, what if we didn't have to trust the banks, whether it's a conventional bank or a crypto bank, and what if we didn't have to save our life savings in a fiat currency that's collapsing in value? And so, Bitcoin is the world's most powerful computing network. It's got 270 exahash of computing power, and it's got 10 gigawatts of energy backing it. It means you don't have to trust the FTXs of the world. So, yeah, I am a big believer because I believe that although crypto in this case may have been the problem, Bitcoin is still the solution. And Sam may
Right.
have made a million Bitcoin maximalists with this crash.
In the meantime, you are calling for registered digital assets to be traded on regulated digital exchanges. I got only a minute to go. Would that remove some of the anonymity that people say is an attractive part of this whole thing?
I think for the industry to move forward, the regulators in the U.S. need to give people the ability to register their digital currency, their digital token, their digital security, and their digital commodity so that they trade on digital exchanges. And right now, the massive confusion is nobody knows the difference between a security and a commodity. And in America, we can't trade on digital exchanges with all these things. So we're really waiting for the regulators to give us a roadmap that allows us to move forward.
Michael, you're one of my favorites in this whole thing because you put your money where your mouth is. You articulate this in a way that no one else does. And every time I speak with you and have the opportunity to interview you, I become more of a believer. So you got to stay out there, my man, because there might be a few more SBFs out there. We don't know. Thank you so much. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Charles.
The human condition is elevated via the channeling of energy, and every great advance was a new form of energy, be it metallic energy in the form of steel, or electrical energy, or chemical energy. Bitcoin is the next evolution of that. It's compelling and critical to the advance of the human race. Every successful investment idea in the 21st century was a digital transformation. Digital transformation of music, digital transformation of entertainment, digital transformation of books, digital communications. Bitcoin's the digital transformation of everything else. So now we have digital transformation of gold, digital transformation of property, and digital transformation of energy. For the first time in the history of the human race, you can literally take energy, transform it into something in cyberspace, store it forever, move at the speed of light, program it, and eliminate the friction.
Every good technology is smarter, faster, stronger. Every technology, smarter, faster, stronger. So coming to digital gold versus gold, physical gold is not fast enough. How fast is it? If I wanted to move $100 million of gold, as we talked about, it's going to cost me $250,000. So it's impedance. But how long is it going to take you? A week? A month? Somewhere between, you want to move 3,000 pounds of gold from New York to, I bet a month, I'm guessing, if you want to get all the protocols set up. So you're talking about $250,000 in a month to move the gold. If assuming I needed another custodian and I used Bitcoin and I wanted to move $100 million of Bitcoin, and this is where, Bitcoin critics are just utterly wrong and missing the point. They all think, oh, well, it takes 30 minutes and $5 to move Bitcoin. And they're comparing it to a new crypto network that has no value on it. And they're saying, I could find a way to move it in 5 minutes for a nickel. But that's not the point. The appropriate comparison is to gold. How long would it take to move $100 million of gold? And because there's $250 trillion in assets in the alt assets, and there's only $25 billion of real asset in the alt coins or the alt cryptos. So how long does it take me to move the $250 trillion around? And when you think about that, you realize that Bitcoin would move it in 30 minutes instead of 30 days. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's 1,440 times as fast, right? 1,000 times as fast a minute versus 1,440 minutes in a day. And so it's 1,000 times as fast, but then it's $5 versus $250,000.
Right.
I know. So we do that. That's 50,000 times cheaper.
Absolutely.
So now we've got people saying, oh, well, it's very energy inefficient, blah, blah, blah.
Well, it's not really. It's inefficient in the way that it's inefficient to create an electro high speed transit system, a mass transit system. It was expensive to build the mass transit system. It got really, really cheap to move on the rails.
Right.
If you look at the history of railroads, right, the biggest thing in the 19th century was railroads. It was pretty expensive to create the railroads. It became really cheap to move on the rails.
Right.
So what we do is we created crypto rails in order to make it 50,000 times cheaper to move. But it's not just that it's 50,000 times cheaper. It's that it's 1,000 times faster and 50,000 times cheaper. And then when you start to multiply 1,000 times 50,000, and you realize it starts to be 50 million times faster.
Right.
And then you start to add that third dimension, which is maybe a computer that thinks about this while you're sleeping 18,000 times. And you realize eventually you get to 50 billion times faster. And now we've got to a new engineering or our new scientific metaphor, which is superconducting networks.
Right.
Okay, if you know, there's impedance going through electric power network and you're losing it. And so the solution is I need to get the superconductance. I got to cool the network down to close to near zero.
Right.
And it's expensive. And the point is, yeah, it's expensive to get to near zero. And then the impedance disappears in the network and the friction goes away. And what could you do if the friction went completely away?
Right. You're in outer space, right? The smallest amount of energy can move something billions of miles. And I love that analogy too, that you're getting to a lower energy state, and that eliminates the frictions to conductance. So you achieve superconductivity, and in a way, that's what Bitcoin is, right? It's a monetary medium completely free of the noise of unexpected inflation. So you're actually conveying pure price signal. Something even gold, we didn't quite have that.
And I love your analogy because, I mean, the aerospace engineer in me is loving it a lot. You could think about when you encrypt monetary energy on the Bitcoin network, it's like achieving escape velocity out of the gravity well. What we've done, we paid a price to get out of the gravity well, throw a baseball on a baseball field that goes a couple of 100 feet. Get out of the gravity well, throw the baseball, it'll go around the earth forever.
Yeah.
It doesn't. Okay, so how much more distance do you get out of the baseball if you pay the price of getting out of the gravity well?
Right.
It's not like 10 times better. It's not 100 times better. It's not 1,000,000 times better. It goes to infinity and it never stops. And that's the breakthrough that people don't get. It's like, what could I do if I had vacuum and I was rid of friction? And yeah, there's a price to pay. And that's your phase change and your state change. And that's why I would say Bitcoin is the most efficient system for channeling energy through time and space in the history of mankind. We've never figured out how to channel energy with no impedance and channel energy with no loss. But let's come back to the outer space analogy. Take your flashlight and shine it in your basement. Take your flashlight, shine it, on your baseball field. Now get into outer space and take your flashlight and shine it. Or flip it the other way, the Hubble telescope, right? How much better are the photos you get from the Hubble telescope than the photos you get from a telescope that has to shoot through the atmosphere?
Right.
It's
Totally free of
like
distortion.
It's 1,000,000,000 times better.
Yeah.
It's like you just can't really imagine the world when you're trapped in
I think
this energy well.
Why Bitcoin? Well, Bitcoin is the most universally desirable property in space and time. It's the property with the lowest maintenance cost. You could put $1 billion of Bitcoin in cold storage and you don't have to pay 2% a year to maintain it, or 5% a year, or 10% a year. The maintenance cost on a boat is 10% a year. The maintenance cost on a building is 3% a year. Whatever it is, there's a cost. You own a company? Well, there's a cost to own a company. If the company didn't have any employees, right, and didn't have any cost, then maybe there wouldn't be as much maintenance. But what do you call a company that has no employees and no maintenance costs? Well, Bitcoin. The layer one is the property settlement layer, and we're going to do 350,000 transactions or less a day. 100 million transactions a year is the bandwidth on the layer one, and it would be an ideal layer one to move $1 billion from point A to point B with massive security. The role of the layer one is two things. One thing is I want to move a large sum of money through space with security. I can move any amount of Bitcoin in a matter of minutes for dollars on layer one. The second important feature of the layer one is I need the money to last forever, right? I need the money indestructible, immortal. So the bigger trick is not to move $1 billion from here to Tokyo. The big trick is to move $1 billion from here to the year 2140. And that's what we want to solve with layer one. And the best real metaphor in New York City would be the granite or the schist. What you want is a city block of bedrock. And how long has it been there? Like millions of years it's been there. And how fast do you want it to move? You don't. In fact, the single thing that's most important is that it not deflect. If it deflects a foot in 100 years, it's too much. If it deflects an inch in 100 years, you might not want that. So the layer one of Bitcoin is a foundation upon which you put weight. How much weight can you put on it? You put 1 trillion, 10 trillion, 100 trillion, a quadrillion. How much weight's on the bedrock in Manhattan, right? Think about 100-story buildings. So the real key there is the foundational asset needs to be there at all. So the fact that you can create $100 trillion layer one that would stand for 100 years, that is the revolutionary breakthrough first time. And the fact that it's ethical, right? It's ethical and it's common property, global, permissionless. Extremely unlikely that would happen. People tried 50 times before and they all failed. They tried 15,000 times after, and they've all generally failed. 98% have failed, and a couple have been less successful. But for the most part, that's an extraordinary thing. Now,
just really quickly pause just to define some terms. For people who don't know, layer one is that Michael's referring to is in general what people know of as the Bitcoin technology originally defined, which is there's blockchain, there's a consensus mechanism of proof of work, low number of transactions, but you can move a very large amount of money. The reason he's using the term layer one is now that there's a lot of ideas of layer two technologies that built on top of this bedrock that allow you to move a much larger number of transactions, so sort of higher frequency. I don't know what terminology you want to use, but basically be able to use now something that is based on Bitcoin to then buy stuff, be a consumer, to transfer money, to use it as currency. Just to define some terms.
Yeah. So the layer one is the foundation for the entire cyber economy. And we don't want it to move fast. What we want is immortality, immortal, incorruptible, indestructible. Right? That's what you want, integrity from the layer one. Now there's layer two and layer three, and layer two I would define as an open, permissionless, non-custodial protocol that uses the underlying layer one token as its gas fee.
So what's custodial mean, and how does the different markets, like is Lightning Network?
So Lightning Network would be an example of a layer 2, non-custodial. So the Lightning Network will sit on top of layer 1. It'll sit on top of Bitcoin, and it solves what you want to do is solve the problem of, it's well and fine, I don't want to move $1 billion every day. What I want to move is $5 a billion times a day. So if I want to move $5 a billion times a day, I don't really need to put the entire $1 trillion of assets at risk every time I move $5. All I really need to do is put $100,000 in a channel or $1 million in a channel, and then I do 10 million transactions where I have $1 million at risk. And of course, it's kind of simple. If I lower my security requirement by a factor of 1 million, I can probably move the stuff 1 million times faster, right? And that's how Lightning works. It's non-custodial because there's no corporation or custodian or counterparty you're trusting, right? There's the risk of moving through the channel, but Lightning is an example of how I go from 350,000 transactions a day to 350 million transactions a day. So on that layer 2, you could move the Bitcoin in seconds for fractions of pennies. Now, that's not the end all be all, because the truth is there are a lot of open protocols. Lightning probably won't be the only one. There's an open market competition of other permissionless open source protocols to do this work. And in theory, any other crypto network that was deemed to be property, deemed to be non-security, you could also think of as potentially a layer 2 to Bitcoin, right? There's a debate about, are there any and what are they? And we could leave that for a later time.
But why do you think of them as layer 2 as opposed to contending for layer 1?
Yeah, actually, if they're using their own token, then they are a layer 1. If you create an open protocol that uses the Bitcoin token as the fee, then it becomes a layer 2.
Okay.
Right? Bitcoin itself, right, incentivizes its own transactions with its own token, and that's what makes it layer 1.
Okay, what's layer 3 then?
Layer 3 is a custodial layer. So if you want to move Bitcoin in milliseconds for free, you move it through Binance or Coinbase or Cash App. So this is a very straightforward thing. I mean, it seems pretty obvious when you think about it that there are going to be hundreds of thousands of layer 3s. There may be dozens of layer 2s. Lightning is A1, but it's not the only one. Anybody can invent something, right? And we can have this debate about custodial, non-custodial.
Don't you think there's a monopolization possibilities at layer 3? So, you mentioned Binance, Coinbase. What if they start to dominate and basically everybody's using them, practically speaking, and then it becomes too costly to memorize the private key in your brain? I mean, or like cold storage of layer 1 technology.
The idealists fear the layer 3s because they think, and especially they would detest it a bit. There's almost like a layer 4, by the way, if you want to. A layer 4 would be, I've got Bitcoin on an application, but I can't withdraw it. So I've got an application that's backed by Bitcoin, but the Bitcoin is sealed. It's a proprietary example. And I'll give you an example of that. That would be like Grayscale. If I own a share of GBTC, and so I own a security, actually, you could own MSTR. If you own a security or you own a product that has Bitcoin embedded in it, you get the benefits of Bitcoin, but you don't have the ability to withdraw the asset.
So you can have a security market at layer 4. Am I understanding this correctly?
I don't know if I would say, not all securities are layer 4, but anything that's a proprietary product based upon with Bitcoin embedded in it, where you can't withdraw the Bitcoin, is another application of Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about different ways you can use this, you can either stay completely on the layer 1 and use the base chain for your transactions, or you can limit yourself to layer 1 and layer 2 Lightning. And the purist would say we stay there, get your Bitcoin off the exchange. But you could also go to the layer 3. When Cash App supported Bitcoin, they made it very easy to buy it, and then they gave you the ability to withdraw. When PayPal, or I think Robinhood, let you buy it, they wouldn't let you withdraw it, and there was a big community uproar, and people want these layer 3s to make it possible to withdraw the Bitcoin so you can take it to your own private wallet and get it off the exchange. I think the answer to the question of, well, is corruption possible, is corruption is possible in all human institutions and all governments everywhere. The difference between digital property and physical property is when you own a building in Los Angeles and the city politics turn against you, you can't move the building.
Yeah.
And when you own a share of a security that's like a US traded security and you wish to move to some other country, you can't take the security with you either. And when you own a bunch of gold and you try to get through the airport, they might not let you take it. So Bitcoin is advantageous versus all those because you actually do have the option to withdraw your asset from the exchange. And if you had Bitcoin with Fidelity and you had shares of stock with Fidelity, and if you had bonds and sovereign debt with Fidelity, and if you own some mutual funds and some other random limited partnerships with Fidelity, none of those things can be removed from the custodian. But the Bitcoin you can take off the exchange, you can remove from the custodian. So
it's still possible.
There's
though.
a deterrent. There's a deterrent that's an anti-corrupting element. And the phrase is an armed society is a polite society, right? Because you have the optionality to withdraw all your assets from the crypto exchange, you can enforce fairness. And at the point where you disagree with their policies, you can, within an hour, move your assets to another counterparty or take personal custody of those assets. And you don't have that option with most other forms of property. Maybe you don't have as much optionality with any other form of property on earth. And so what makes digital property distinct is the fact that it has the most optionality for custody. Now, coming back to this digital energy issue, the real key point is the energy moves in milliseconds for free on layer 3s. It moves in seconds or less than seconds on layer 2s. It moves in minutes on the layer 1. And I don't think it makes any sense to even think about trying to solve all 3 problems on the layer 1 because it's impossible to achieve the security and the incorruptibility and the immortality if you try to build that much speed and that functionality and performance. In fact, if you come back to the New York model, you really wanted a block of granite, a building, and a company. That's what makes the economy, right? If I said to you, you're going to build a building, but you can only have one company in it for the life of the building, it would be very fragile, like very brittle. What company 100 years ago is still relevant today? You want all 3 layers because they all oscillate at different frequencies. And there's a tendency to think, well, it's got to be this L1 or that L1. Not really. And sometimes people think, well, I don't really want any L3. But companies, it's not an either or. Companies are better than crypto asset networks at certain things. If you want complexity, you want to implement complexity, or you want to implement compliance or customer service, right? Companies do these things well, right? We know you couldn't decentralize Apple or Netflix or even YouTube. The performance wouldn't be there and the subtlety wouldn't be there. And you can't really legally decentralize certain forms of banking and insurance because they would become illegal in the political jurisdiction they're in. So unless you're a crypto anarchist and you believe in no companies and no nation states, right? Which is just not very practical, not anytime soon. Once you allow that nation states will continue and companies have a role, then the layered architecture follows, and the free market determines who wins. For example, there are layer threes that let you acquire Bitcoin and withdraw Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
There are other applications that let you acquire it but not withdraw it, and they don't get the same market share, but they might give you some other advantage. There are certain layer threes like Jack Dorsey's Cash App where they just incorporated Lightning, an implementation of it. So
into Cash App.
So that makes it advantageous versus an application that doesn't incorporate Lightning. If you think about the big picture is 8 billion people with mobile phones served by 100 million companies doing billions of transactions an hour. And the companies are settling with each other on the base layer in blocks of 80 million at a time. And then the companies are trading with the consumers, right, in proprietary layers like layer 3. And then on occasion, people are shuffling assets across custodians with Lightning layer 2 because you don't want to pay $5 to move $50. You want to pay a 20th of a penny to move $50. And so all of these things create efficiency in the economy. And Lex, if you want to consider how much efficiency, if you gave me $1 billion in 20 years, I couldn't find a way to trade with another company or a counterparty in Nigeria.
Mm-hmm.
Like no amount of money. You give me $10 billion, I couldn't do it because you get shut down at the banking level. You can't link up a bank in Nigeria with a bank in the US. You get shut down at this credit card level because they don't have the credit card, so they won't clear. You get shut down at the compliance FCPA level because you wouldn't be able to implement a system that interfaced with somebody else's system if it's not in the right political jurisdiction. On the other hand, 3 entrepreneurs in Nigeria on the weekend could create a website that would trade in this Lightning economy using open protocols without asking anybody's permission. So you're talking about something that's like 1 million times cheaper, less friction, and faster to do it if you want to get money to move.